You ever have that feeling? You're distracted, you're unfocused, and you're just not as motivated as you know you could be. Well, today we're going to get to the bottom of why that happens, and believe it or not, it all comes down to this tiny little chemical in your brain.
I mean, it's something we've all been through, right? You pick up your phone for what you think is just a second, and boom, an hour's just vanished. Or what about that new gadget, or that show everyone's talking about, or even a new hobby? The excitement is there, and then it just, poof, it evaporates. So we're going to break down the actual brain science behind why that happens.
Okay, so to really get a grip on the problem, we actually have to go way, way back. Because this little chemical at the heart of it all, well, it's not some flaw in our design. Turns out it's one of our greatest evolutionary superpowers.
All right, so here's the first big surprise for a lot of people. We always hear dopamine called the pleasure hormone, but that's not really accurate. It's not about the pleasure itself, it's about the anticipation of it. It's the craving, the drive, that little voice in your head that says, go get that. It's literally the engine of our ambition. And this is the perfect way to understand its purpose. I mean, think about it. Dopamine is what motivated our ancestors to go hunt a giant, dangerous mammoth for a huge payoff, instead of just, settling for the easy-to-find roots near the cave. Why would they do that? Because the anticipation of that massive reward was so powerful, it drove them to do incredibly hard things. Honestly, you could say it's what built civilization.
So, if dopamine is so great, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that our ancient brain chemistry is now trying to operate in a totally modern world. A world that is just filled with instant gratification. And that's exactly where our whole reward system gets hijacked. There was this classic experiment back in the 1950s that gives us a pretty terrifying preview of our modern dilemma. Basically, scientists gave a rat a little button, and every time the rat pushed it, it got a direct jolt to its dopamine release circuit. The results were, well, they were chilling.
And get this, the rat just kept pressing the button over and over and over again. It completely forgot about food, water, sleep, everything. It literally chose this artificial stimulation over its own survival. And that's the key, right? This wasn't about feeling good. It was about an uncontrollable, manufactured craving that just took over.
So that experiment isn't just some old story about rats in a lab anymore. In a way, we are all in a similar kind of cage today. We're just surrounded by our own versions of that dopamine button, and they're all designed to be absolutely irresistible.
So what are these modern buttons? Oh yeah, you know them. We're talking about video games with their constant level-ups, social media with the anticipation of every like and comment, online shopping with that thrill of a new deal, and of course the big one, that endless, unpredictable scroll of short-form videos. Each one gives you a quick, low-effort hit of that chemical. They're all sources of what we call cheap dopamine.
But just like with that rat, this endless river of easy rewards comes at a really high price. It's not free. It fundamentally changes the way our brains work and what we even find motivating anymore.
Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine you walk into a store that sells scented candles. At first, the smell is just overwhelming, right? But after a few minutes, you kind of stop noticing it. Your brain adapts. Well, it's the exact same thing with dopamine. When you're constantly flooding your brain with these cheap, easy hits, your receptors become less sensitive. They get used to it. And your whole baseline for what counts as interesting just gets jacked up to an impossibly high level. And this tolerance, this leads to real, tangible problems in our lives. Suddenly doing something difficult like reading a book or really focusing on a project, it feels boring. It just can't compete. So we end up feeling anxious, totally burned out, and just unmotivated. And the weirdest part is, we're surrounded by all this fun stuff to do.
And look, this isn't just in your head. This is a neurological reality. All of that information overload puts your prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like the CEO of your brain, under immense strain. It's trying to switch tasks constantly, filter out all the noise. It just gets exhausted. And that makes it so much harder to concentrate on the stuff that actually matters.
Okay, so that's the problem. It sounds a little bleak, I know, but here's the really good news. You can escape the trap. You can actually retrain your brain and get that focus and motivation back. So, let's talk about how to do it. So it really just boils down to a fundamental choice. A choice we have to make, 100 times a day. On one side, you've got the fast, cheap dopamine, scrolling, junk food, all that passive stuff. And on the other, you have the long, earned dopamine, the stuff that takes effort but gives you real satisfaction. One is a quick, fleeting high. The other? That's what builds real, lasting self-respect.
And let's be super clear here. The goal is not to eliminate dopamine. I mean, that would be impossible and, honestly, a pretty boring life. No, the goal is to reset your brain's sensitivity to it. It's about making your brain appreciate the good stuff again so you can find real satisfaction in healthy, meaningful things and not just the cheap thrills.
So what's the actual game plan? Well, it's a 4-step process. First, you got to minimize the big stimuli. Figure out your biggest time wasters and cut back. Second, control your environment. Turn off those useless notifications. Maybe even try grayscale mode on your phone to make it less shiny and appealing. Third, you got to consciously choose long dopamine activities. Schedule time for exercise, reading, a creative project. And finally, set and achieve real goals. Break big tasks down into smaller, bite-sized pieces so you can get that healthy sense of accomplishment along the way.
And really, this brings it all home. The healthiest, most sustainable motivation doesn't come from passively scrolling or getting a virtual thumbs up. It comes from the genuine pride and satisfaction of actually doing something you set out to do, something that took real effort.
So ultimately, it just comes down to a choice. A choice that really we're all making dozens of times every single day. And just knowing the difference between these two paths, that is the first and honestly the most powerful step to reclaiming your focus and your motivation. So, which one are you going to choose today?